don't even talk about fair housing anymore because most of the middle class people of color can now move in any neighborhood they want to. And that's not where the issue is. The rubber meets the road for those who cannot afford to move in those areas. Education. There's still a big difference, disparity between when we look at District 1 and District 2. About 5 to 7 years ago, District 2 was 50% white, 45% black, and 5% others. Now it's about 80%. How many African American principals do we have over there? Has the superintendent actually changed to make up the behavior? So again, I'd make the statement for those who could help make the change, and that's those in the middle of these parties. They're not ready for the change. And because you put your money where your mouth is, if you really want aggressive change in South Carolina, and they don't want that.
Let me ask you this question. You brought up the issue of people wanting change. And that's another area of symbolism. Two words that you hear a lot that disturbs me a lot is angry and black. Angry and black. Now, I know, listen, I'm not trying to offend anyone here, not at all, but we want to put true problems out on the table and try to find a solution. Okay? You hear angry black, and that's associated with black men, angry black men, angry black men. So when you hear that terminology so much, that becomes a symbol for the state of the black community in white minds. So now, how do we change that? How do we get over that symbol out there that I can't talk to you about that, Senator Scott, because you're an angry black man. So I can't talk to this angry black man. So we can't have good dialogue because maybe I'm afraid or I've heard that so much that I don't want to talk to you. How do we change that?
I don't know that you can change it. Because the anger that you're talking about is what I gave you a few minutes ago. Real facts.
Yes.
Real facts. You may not like the method in which I gave it to you. But they're real facts. Listen, Columbia, South Carolina, the capital city, is changing. You know, a lot of folk don't like the fact it's changing. Its county council is controlled by African Americans. Its city council is controlled by African Americans. Its school districts are slowly being changed by African Americans. And so what? What does it mean? Each time there's a small issue that occurred, the newspaper takes it to the extreme. Takes it to the extreme. And really, truly, y'all never really get the real facts. And because they don't print the real facts in most cases, they print what the readers want to read. I've seen for many years contracts and contract distribution, and who received the contracts, and whose economic conditions change because of contracts. And now that we've seen places like Columbia change, where people of color are in charge, they're almost afraid to do the contracts. They're afraid if they give out contracts the same as been given out for years, there's going to be a backlash. So it's not an angriness, it's the fact that you don't want to hear the real facts.
Dr. Matt?
You know, what has happened is that we don't want to push the button, and we don't want you to push the button. And that comes from the fact that in a lot of cases, we have deserted our communities. As a kid growing up, I looked across the street, there were principals, the teachers, the ministers, everybody who was doing something lived across the street. They don't live across the street anymore. And so we don't want you stirring it up for where we live now, because we live in other neighborhoods. And you know, you might stir it up. The fact that you say that 21,000 are incarcerated and 14,000 of those 21 are African Americans in a population where African Americans are only a third, that's an issue. When you talk about the fact that the household income for the majority group is near $60,000, and for the minority group is barely creeping up on 30, that's a problem. You know, and people, a lot of times, African American people, you know, they don't want to hear it because you rocking the boat, you upsetting the apple cart. It's all right, leave it alone. You know, and so they look at people who don't leave it alone as angry troublemakers. Yeah, he's a troublemaker. So versus putting him there, we don't want, no, you don't run for that. You sit back here, we get somebody who's more politically correct, more diplomatic, and we'll go that route. So that's a lot of what we're facing. We deserve it.
The law enforcement, the big issue. In effect, in most cases, you value your homes. Who's going to be your neighbors? And I want you, those of you who are part of Senate District 19, raise your hand. Senate District 19, raise your hand. That's me, that's my district. Raise your hand. John, you was part of it. But guess what? Senate District 19, if you look back prior to me becoming a senator, had all kinds of law enforcement issues. Drugs were rampant, speeding cars. And then when you begin to hold everybody accountable, what happened? The neighborhoods got quiet. They got quiet. That's the kind of leadership that they don't want. That's the kind of leadership you spoke of. They don't want, because you begin to hold people accountable. You spend the extra time with the neighborhoods. You get to know the people. And the net result, the $50,000 house now becomes an $80,000 house because there's no crime in there. The crime has gone down. And it shifts over to the basic middle to middle upper income, few divided 3 class, not divided to 9. Middle class neighborhoods. It's all about economics, folks, and don't fool yourself. When I look at our own congressman, give me one good reason why that should not have been an easy move for our congressman to be United States Senator. He knew all the issues, he knew all the people, but the real question was, because he shakes the tree and he shakes people, would the other side provide him that kind of support? So sometimes we cheat ourselves, and we allow them to do that to us through the use of parties.
Some questions, or get some questions from the audience. And this one will be directed to Dr. Mack and Senator Scott. And this one definitely has to do with intra-race relations. Why is it that when a white person or white law enforcement officer kills a black person, we hear Black Lives Matter, but we don't hear that when the crime is black on black? Why are there no demonstrations on that?
Good question. Good question. It's all media control. It's all media driven. If you want black on black crime to stop, the media plays a role in the drive-by shooting. The media then has to report where the drugs are and who's distributing the drugs and the domestic violence and the real issues, and have to give you the real statistics of where the numbers are and how it actually affects the neighborhood. The real questions that goes really unreported in the killing, whether it's a white officer who shoots a black person, a black officer who shoots a black person, is in law enforcement doing their own drive-by. And you get the same excuse all the time. The person was trying to run over me with a car. An unarmed person who you shoot from the back of the car or from the far side of the car that you didn't get hit and you're out of the way, and that person was trying to run over me with the car. I'm sick of hearing about that. The numbers are out the ceiling, out the ceiling. And so what you're getting now is real reports that have been hidden reports for so long that you didn't see it on the media, of senseless killing of white officers on black folk. And you're not going to get the rural county stuff where you got one for this police officer, I think that was up in Orangeburg County. This guy was getting in his truck. You tell me, getting in his truck. Let him go. The sheriff department's going to go and pick him up. But you took it into your own and you cold blood killed that man. And so what you're seeing now is really cold blood killing and not one gang versus another gang or somebody getting into an altercation.
What I'm thinking that person meant by that is that in the black community, if a white officer kills a black person, then there's an outrage on the black community's part. But in black communities, when blacks kill blacks, where is that same outrage?
Media. Media is not covered.
There should be an outrage, because Black Lives Matter, no matter who's doing the killing, whether it's whites doing the killing, blacks doing the killing, doesn't matter. You know, my hometown is a prime example, Savannah. We probably had, at one time, there were about 20 killings in 22 days, all black on black. None related to police officers. This was just drugs and those types of activities, black on black. You see the riverfront, for those of you who've been there, and you see the visiting areas. You see people walking around downtown, but you better not go past them. If you go past there, you're on your own, because it is an issue. But here's what happens: we have put African American young people in a position, in a lot of cases, of hopelessness. And when you back someone into a corner of hopelessness, then they're going to take action, and all of the time that action is not the appropriate action that they need to take. But when they feel like they have no way to get a job, no way to make a living, you know, they're the next generation getting ready to go to be incarcerated because their father is already incarcerated, they're already angry for that, then there are things that we have to do as a community and as a country in an improvement of the quality of life for people. And with that, we'll begin to see some change. But what we have is the have and the have-nots. And the have-nots continue to have not. The haves continue to have more. And it creates that type of attitude, sentiment, and anger where, hey, I'll shoot, if you just look at me funny, I'm gonna shoot you. You know, and we gotta get away from that. We have to have some economic development. We have to put some people to work. We have to give them hope as young people in early grades, kindergarten, before they even start school. That, you know, one day you don't have to do this. You can do this. And until we get there, because, you know, that's what you have. Young people have to fight to survive. You know, they have to fight to survive in a lot of communities and neighborhoods that we don't understand. We don't understand. We wouldn't drive by there. We wouldn't go through there. You know, and we don't understand. But they do it day in and day out. You know, I had kids in the school district, couldn't do their classwork, gunfire. You know, they had to worry about whether they were going to make it to school the next day alive. Not so much with the lesson. You know, and those are things that we as adults need to be working on. You know, where are we going to go beyond this panel? Is this just a panel from 6 to 7 o'clock? And that's it?
Yeah.
You know, where are we going to go beyond this panel? Is the issue, getting the panel, having the panel is not the issue. The issue is where we're going to go beyond the panel.
We're gonna get.
Yeah, another comment. I want to kind of qualify what I said, media. Colony Apartment was a very good example. There were several shootings in the Colony Apartment for a very long time. It was not until the community got tired of it, and the community became an uproar. Then you saw the media do several writings and TV shows about the Colony Apartment. The other apartment over there off Beltline Boulevard, the old Washington Carver Village, the same thing. It's all about media. Why was the media slow to act on all of it? Because all these areas were heavily drug driven. And they knew that. And it meant it demanded better police protection for those people who lived in there. But because they were in low-income housing, and it became what's called acceptable behavior for that community, and they allowed this to continue to go on. I remember in 2009, my wife and I was around to Paris in Germany. There was 109 indictments in the Eau Claire community. So what did they do? They really cleaned up the drug dealers. That's all. It's not that they didn't know they were there. They began to clean up the drug dealers. And so if we're going to put money in those communities and cause law enforcement to have to better patrol those communities, then that's when you see the media really play to certain communities.
One of the things thank you very much for advertising CRC's Fair Housing Program. Thank you very much. We appreciate that very much.
I think I was part of that.
Yeah, I just wanted to address several comments, especially comments about the Black Lives Matter. I guess I represent several of the demographics you just spoke about. I'm an angry black man, but I ain't angry today. Young people in the media. The statement Black Lives Matter, I do not agree with because I do believe all lives matter. But one of the statements you guys made several times that young people are not interested. I was interested in politics at 18. I went to work for the legislature at age 27. One of the things that I got frustrated with is that the issues that I cared about, I did not see at the State House in my leadership. And under Representative Joe Neal and Gilda Cobb-Hunter, they were always asking me to speak out. Senator Scott was always a good person to talk to. But the Black Lives Matter movement is the young people's version of the civil rights. And it's not that our lives don't matter, is we are paying tax dollars for the police to kill us. There's just as much white on white crime as there is black on black crime. But I think what the movement is saying that, hey, listen, you're not listening to young people. Dr. Matt talked about that buffer between the rich and the poor. Well, in interrace relation, there is a buffer between young black people and old black people. And a lot of times, it's that frustration when you talk about symbolism, is that symbolism that you don't see. What is the symbol that says when the school system has to sue the state to say, hey, you're not adequately funding our education. So what's that type of symbolism? And I think that the voices of young people and that you guys are speaking about, majority of the people that were killed during this uptake in police brutality are young. And it's just like, even with this panel, our voices are now being represented. And I think it needs that direction of our elders to take it to a level where it can be productive. Because what you have now with the Black Lives Matter is the same type of thing you had with the Occupy Wall Street. You have the energy, but you don't have the direction.
You know,
And
we're gonna switch topics in just a moment.
And you don't have the interest. I've got about 35 homeowners groups across District 19. I could count on one hand how many young people I'm gonna have there between the age of 21 and 25. They don't. When I was 11, the Urban League moved in my neighborhood. I became the Urban League's first youth president. And by the time I was 25, I was on the NAACP Columbia board, and Boy Scout, and anything that had some leadership capability. All these groups are free to join. Homeowner associations are free to be part of, but you can't get them involved and get them interested in first knowing and understanding the background issues and what impact they can have to move forward. And so if we have cleanups in your neighborhood, that's one of the better examples you can find. And you'll find the older group, I don't want to call this old, because I'm among that group. You'll find that group, that's the one who's out there cleaning up the neighborhood, picking up paper from the side of the road. You cannot, unless it's a fraternity sorority who makes it as a regular project, you can't find those young people who will put the time in to really get involved. And that's why the face of most of these issues are senior people.
I was just gonna say something real quick. So this has been so, I think, helpful for me to hear, and I guess as the minority member of this panel.
You talking about female?
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You know, I guess I maybe have a question for my fellow panelists in trying to understand. You know, I guess my perspective is that public policy and politics has such an important role to play, but that it seems like both Republican and Democrat, we put too much pressure on politics as the answer and policies as the answer, when it seems like the first thing we have to figure out is how we hear each other's heart. I would say that, and Senator Scott, you know, I would say that that you and I share a heart for people. That's why you sacrifice so much of your time in service to the community. And I guess my question is, you and I probably disagree on a lot of public policy stuff. I don't know, I haven't had that conversation with you. But how do we have that conversation in a way where, as someone who has been part of a group that has historically disenfranchised you, how can my voice be heard in this community in a way that doesn't assume that if I disagree with you on a public policy issue, that I do it for reasons that are wrong or that are historically, I guess, tainted? Does that make sense?
I'll try to pick some pieces out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But believe it or not, public policy drives that complete behavior. And I'll give you a very simple public policy that now we're coming back to visit gun control. I stood on the floor of the Senate for two years fighting the distribution of guns in bars and restaurants. And now all of a sudden, we're seeing that the net result of people who went through some kind of small training, they had guns, and we're putting more guns out there. And we're now witnessing more guns being stolen out of cars and out of homes, and somebody getting killed or the serial number scratched off, or just the back and forth shooting that we talked about. Those are real issues, but that's an issue, a public policy issue, that very little conversation when it was being driven in the State House was actually talked about in the overall community. I remember in Emerald community, I brought the issue up to talk about guns, and one of the behavior was, I don't know if I take my gun, I've always had a gun. Okay, you had your gun, but that's not the real issue. The issue is where you carry your gun, and rather than what that gun is going to do. Public policies relates to education. Those schools that are not doing well, and those schools who need to have buildings built. Some would argue that those schools who are low-income community, the state does not need to have the same responsibility, such as that may be in rural communities. Well, you do. If you're going to educate students, you've got to put them in the best facilities possible. That's public policy, again, driving issues at home. When we talked about Medicaid expansion, I can't remember one of my communities talking about Medicaid expansion, because everybody had health care. And it was really not about most of them who had health care, but it's public policy again, that was pushing, people above the low income level area, minimum wage. We talked a little bit about minimum, but again, public policy, because we grow so used to seeing people without, it becomes an acceptable practice.
And what we're gonna do, Dr. Mack, if you don't mind, because I wanna get to, I wanna, get to you. As I mentioned, we've had 3 forums before this, and I want to pull out the major issue from each of those forums, and I'm going to start with the Forum on Race and Education, Dr. Mack. The major thing that came out in that forum, and by the way, we're going to have a summary of all the questions and answers of every forum. We'll have a link to it on our website by the first of the week. Right, Nancy? Okay. By the first of the week, we do have video there as well. Yes, sir? Oh, well, okay, well, go ahead.
Number one, thank you very much for hosting this from your Religion Council. And that's really taking your time. I'm a member of the Baha'i faith. Over a century and a half ago, Baha'u'llah foretold these issues we are talking about, the impending problems that we are talking about. Not only he foretold them, he brought divine principles that when applied, solutions will emerge. Viewed from a Baha'i perspective, there are 6 institutions in the society. When you open up this seemingly simple principle that Baha'u'llah introduced, the principle of the oneness of mankind, seemingly simple principle. When one opens it up, examines it, and applies it, 6 institutions in society will rise that must wholeheartedly embrace the principle of the oneness of man. One is religious institutions, scientific communities, educational communities, economic, media, and art, whether acting or singing. When these 6 institutions rise to the principle of oneness of mankind, the majority of humanity will follow them. So viewed from a Baha'i perspective, my question is, I wish Ms. Gaston was here. What is the role of media in providing the healing to this pain?
And unfortunately, our media person was here, and he's left, and Judy is not here tonight. We can't answer your question on the role of media, but Senator Scott has mentioned several times that the media and the media's role. And what I commend to you to do is to ask that question of a media person. Oh, wait a minute. I have a media person sitting right here. You're from Minority Eye, and this gentleman has asked a question about the media's role. Would you like to comment on that?
I can try to answer your question. And to be clear, your question was what role does the media play in uplifting the community for or promoting positive information? Is that?
You're either part of the solution or problem. Is media part of the solution to heal the racism or keep on adding fuel to the racism? Which are you? And not you, as a media collective. I mean, you cannot be both.
Well, I think that's a broad question because you're back at politics now. The media is a business industry, but you have conservative controlled media and you have liberal controlled media, and then you have media, I'm just gonna put a story out there to get more